Welcome to this installment of supplemental lectures provided by PNC's Concurrent Enrollment Program. My name is Alexandra Kindle, and I will share some information with you that comes out of my History 151 course at Purdue University North Central. Today we will take a look at the topic of nationalism. This is an important topic for understanding early American history, but often harder for young people. Events are more discrete, with physical actions, dates, and resolution. Ideas are ephemeral, hard to pin down like pinning jelly to a wall. Nationalism is deeply connected to the formation of identity. If you're a sports fan, this will make sense. How do you identify yourself as a Boilermaker, a Packers fan, or a Bulls fan? What made you like that team? And why is your team better than any other team? And how do you show that you are a fan of that team? For the English people living in the North American colonies, their sense of identity formed prior to the Revolution. As the colonial elite gathered to protest the policies of king and parliament, many could not imagine giving up their country. Remember that as late as July 1775, John Dickinson authored the Olive Branch Petition restating colonial loyalty to George III, despite his disagreement with the tax policies. But the events prior to the Revolution forced colonists to rethink their identities, rethink them as distinct from England. Some scholars point to the Boston Tea Party as one of those events, arguing that men dressed as Indians did so to set themselves apart as American, not to disguise themselves. These scholars point to the fact that 16,000 people in the population, Boston was too small for anyone to truly hide their participation. Think of a town near you that has 16,000 people in it, and factor in just the adult white males. It's a reasonable argument. But once the Revolution was over, the founders had to create a permanent feeling of identity, because most colonists felt more attached to their new states than any new national government. Hopefully by now you can guess that nationalism is something that has to be created. Nationally and at the state and local levels, men interested in cultivating nationalism started creating America's traditions, including celebrating independence on July 4th, 1777. Many Americans embraced the idea of celebrating the 4th of July, but creating nationalism as a whole was a process. For example, search in Google the phrase "early American flags" to see all the varieties. In Europe, capital cities were important places, and for early Americans this also took some time to settle on the right place. During the Confederation period, the government moved from city to city until it settled into its longest-standing home in New York City. But as New Yorker Alexander Hamilton attempted to put his Federalist economic vision into place, Republicans brokered a deal to move the capital further south. For Virginians such as Thomas Jefferson or James Madison, having the capital closer to them was a part of keeping their states and the peculiar institution integrated into the American identity. So, because of the Compromise of 1790, a piece of land was carved out of Maryland and Virginia to become Washington, D.C. As stipulated by the agreement, the seat of government was to be moved to the new capital in 1800. John Adams was the first president to serve in it during the last months of his term. Thomas Jefferson was the first president elected after the move. In preparation of the move, surveyors did their jobs, and Major Charles Pierre L'Enfant was hired to design the capital in 1791. The capital was to be a centerpiece of the nation, with a Baroque-style plan and open spaces for ceremonies. Dignity and opportunities to enhance nationalism were embedded into the city's plan. There were other ways of building a new American identity, and training young people through education was especially important. Founders' wives such as Abigail Adams understood the great opportunity presented by their husbands in the form of the new democratic republic. When the founders imagined this new tyranny-free state, they looked to Rome for an example. People were to be governed by laws written down, chosen and executed by citizens, not kings or parliamentarian despots. The republican government, from the Latin phrase res publica, meant public matter. This gave structure for creating a new government. George Washington became the iconic Republican. He fought to protect his land, but hung up his sword to return to his land to farm. The fasces represents the strength of the states tied together. But educated ladies such as Adams listened to revolutionary ideas spoken by fathers, husbands, and brothers. As the men spoke of tyranny of kings, these women saw a parallel to how homes were governed by men. England was a patriarchal nation, and women were bound by coverture to be legally non-existent. Adams made this connection for her husband John in her letters. Please read. Thus, women who wanted to see more access to education for women argued that women needed this education to prepare American citizens. Children learned their first lessons at home from their mothers. Mothers needed to be able to teach their children Republican virtues of citizenship, hard work, and morality. Linda Kerber, who coined the term Republican motherhood, found that from 1780 to 1850, education for women increased and was the greatest social change for women resulting from the Revolution. In 1780, women were half as literate as men, and the percentage got smaller into the 19th century. The nation was also committed to building schools, and American authors such as Washington Irving began creating literature based on American experiences and ideals. Thus, people who wanted to know what it meant to be American could look to such writings or the products of American education to find their answers. And here's just a little reminder that the founders did pay tribute to the need for more American education to create citizens in the form of the Land Ordinance of 1785. At first, founders made efforts to build nationalism, but over time other events managed to help Americans build their identity. This was the case with the events prior to and during the War of 1812. It started in the early 19th century with the Napoleonic Wars. As England and France duked it out on land and by sea, England attempted to maintain its navy and the strength thereof by tracking down deserters and impressing a few Americans into service along the way. The Chesapeake Leopard incident led to President Jefferson's embargo to protect future shipping. So as Europeans waged war, Americans built an identity as distinct and unmarred by centuries of mutual disdain, as in the case of the French and the English. But by 1810, Congress gained enough war hawks, such as Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. These war hawks were willing to address British missteps with war. Overall, Americans did poorly in the battles, with a low point in 1814 when the Redcoats toasted President Madison from within the Capitol building and then proceeded to burn the city. But the Americans made a few good moves, repelling the British at Maryland's Port McHenry and a few other places. By late 1814, both sides were willing to end the war. War is a destructive process for the most part, yet in the case of this war, it helped the new baby country in creating a sense of place. The Brits attacked from New York to Louisiana, and Americans had to fulfill their roles as Republican citizen soldiers. From the building of the capital city to its burning, Americans found their home in the Union of States tied together by their federal government. The War of 1812 had tangible effects for the nation. Because of Jefferson's embargo and then the isolation of war, Americans had to stop relying on their main source of manufactures, the British. Despite the Revolution, Americans had not fully given up on its economic relationship with Great Britain until then. Americans rose to meet the challenges of the war militarily and economically, and by 1815 the American economy began to transform into a more market-based economy. Symbolically, the war was good for the nation, because the new baby nation stood up to its virtual parents. The youngins didn't necessarily beat their elders, but the United States survived a war against one of the greatest powers in the world. Not a win, but not a loss either. And for the sake of the issue of nationalism, as Americans fought the war, the line between the us and the them was made quite clear. Out of the Battle of Fort McHenry, one of the few American battle victories, Francis Scott Key wrote a poem about the events there. This poem, of course, became the Star-Spangled Banner song as we know it. Key immortalized the idea that despite a formidable foe and many lost battles, the American flag was still there. It gives me nationalistic goosebumps just thinking about it. And on the right is the flag that was actually flying at Fort McHenry. From here on out, Americans spent their time worrying about the internal affairs of the nation. And those are the issues your instructor will bring to you as you move on into the antebellum era. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that this information will help you in your studies. We all hope to see you at PNC when you are done with your high school degree.